today. Jorma, thank you for, you got dressed up for me. I said there's a sweater on, you got the collared shirt.
Mate.
I appreciate that very much. And just to quickly run through introductions again, my name is Matt Doherty. I run East Coast for Teads, and I'm thrilled to be joined today by my friend Jorma, who is the global media manager for Bose, to discuss what is admittedly a pretty broad topic in the future of media. And I have to say, it seems fitting, maybe even a bit poetic, given the current state of affairs in the United States, to be discussing the topic of the future with the European. And, you know, I think what the focus today, because it's such a broad topic, was, Jorma, what we kind of, when we sat down and chatted about this, we said, let's kind of explore how the media world has been disrupted in the near term, given there's been plenty of that, and certainly a lot of salient insight from your side to share. And then also look at how some of the looming trends that the market has and industry has been kind of positing and predicting for the last few years, how those might affect those trends might affect the ecosystem's long-term outlook. So I think we'll try to save some time at the end for questions. So please feel free to drop them in the chat, and we'll try to get to them at the end of today's conversation. But Jorma, if you're good with it, let's start with the short term. What's right in front of us. And I think you know, there's no better place to start than to talk about the upcoming holiday season, because there's obviously been a ton of disruption this year. We don't need to rehash that. But shopping and consumer behaviors, and Marcus mentioned this in the introduction, have clearly been heavily impacted and have been changed as a result. So, you know, my first question, what I'd love to start today's conversation with, is to better understand how, as a luxury brand, how is Bose approaching the upcoming holiday season this year, and specifically, you know, have you changed or adapted your e-com and acquisition approach at all? How are you preparing for a reduction in foot traffic that's being kind of expected and called for from the traditional brick and mortar retail channels?
Love the question. And God, it has been a year, and we're really proud to be at that point in the calendar where we're facing some more of a positive side of the year with the holidays coming up. And I'm proud of a company that has managed really well through these times, but there have been a lot of challenges thrown at each and every one of us in the industry. Alongside that, we also saw a few opportunities, and now back to the holiday, we're very excited to be at that point, and we're entering the season with more focus than ever before, if I can say that. The e-commerce approach that we're taking and the acquisition strategy has definitely somewhat changed, but taking a step back before even COVID came, if anyone can remember those days, we've already announced a reduction in our own stores, and with that came the challenges of physical traffic, physical sales falling somewhat away, but you know, that was accounted for. With COVID, there wasn't any help coming, and we saw that traffic go down so badly and so heavily also with our resellers that definitely posed a few challenges. Physical store sales are important. Physical product demos are really essential, as well as trials as part of our business. So in a way, we stepped on this path before COVID, but we had to speed up a lot when that one hit us. And also, as the media manager, in terms of media, we've set out to increasingly leverage digital channels a while back, seeing basically that the consumer and her touch points have increasingly become a digital nature. We understood that, and we had great opportunity to bridge a gap between the consumer journey when, in traditional senses, we advertised the upper funnel and somewhat caught sales in the lower funnel. We were now able to measure exactly the connection of that consumer journey. I've extensively worked with my colleagues who look after first-party data to identify opportunities to tie these knots between upper and lower funnel, and we've had applied learnings about existing customers, where they came from, how they purchased, what they purchased, and that helped us a great deal to target potentially new ones. And so we did a lot of groundwork in the past, and it really, it's picking up a lot now.
And Jorma, you know, I think something that was really interesting to me is, you know, for a brand that is such a tactile and trial-based brand, to now kind of adjust to, you know, a commercial strategy now that is very dependent on virtual retailing. How have you guys married that? Is that a challenge? Is it an opportunity for you? Is there anything that you've done to kind of adjust the sales experience accordingly?
We've done a lot of work, and really big shout out to everyone involved in that. 'Cause digital isn't just a function or a department at Bose. Everything over the last couple of months, even years maybe, has set out in motion to transition to ever more digital. And if you go to our product page for frames, the sunglasses with embedded sound, you'll see that the customer experience has been enhanced, and you can try the frames on much like a Snapchat lens nowadays. So we adopted that trial to get the customer experience almost as good. And also, if you own any pair of headphones, preferably Bose, of course, you can jump on our soundbar pages and learn the difference between watching an NFL game with the soundbar and without. And that's one thing I personally advise everyone to try, because I have to admit, before working for Bose, TV sounded good enough for me, watching anything like concerts, movies, whatever it is. But ever since I had my first speaker set, I cannot experience or have the same excitement when I experience sound, at least not without the bass. So yeah, that's two hands-on demonstrations how we embrace the digital transition. On the one hand, with the experience and providing trial online. At the same time, on a more e-commerce focused projects, we also extended our trial periods. So when the consumer gives us the trust of purchasing a product without the capability of trying it in the physical store environment, we kind of embrace that trust and reward it with a longer product trial. And if it, doesn't function well enough for the consumer, or he doesn't like it and love it, he can send us back.
And it's not just obviously the digital experience that's changed, but Jorma, one area, an arena of media that we talked about quite a bit in our pre-call was the linear world has really changed too. And so, it's interesting because obviously there's been, no one has been impervious to this disruption, but specifically when the pandemic, with the onset of the pandemic, with the events and live sports programming being heavily impacted, which is historically an area that Bose has really had a significant presence in, with sponsorship with NFL and Formula One. And I'm just curious, has your approach to live programming changed at all? Has the pandemic forced you to reimagine some of the live and event-based sponsorships that Bose is participating in for the remainder of this year or next year? And maybe is there any kind of unique opportunity, given the fluidity of event scheduling these days, that might present?
It's definitely gotten a lot different, right? Before entering into the existing partnerships we have, I do want to mention that we shouldn't forget about the partnerships we just announced with Riot. While it's certainly different and new to us type of partnership, it's massive, with these events drawing crowds unimaginable, easily filling stadiums the size of NFL stadiums, depending on event and regions. Not to mention the online viewership and the engagement. And if you allow the short excursion, gaming in my mind has evolved so much over the last few years that it's really hard to imagine having a communication approach of any kind without it playing a role.
Yeah.
Now, shifting that to live programming, with the right partnership came the World Championships, which you can see online, but not in the arena. That was definitely a pity. But our approach to live programming was and is, much as with any research done in our company, it's based on where the consumer needs. We see that live sports play a great role in consumers' lives. And I mean, when politicians were debating on how we should look at office, work from home, transportation system, theaters and schools, all in light of COVID, one of the fastest going back to normal industries we saw were live sports events. Without the fans, that is, but the teams were rushing to get back to the season schedules, even if that meant having to let go of some of the awesome live and site experiences. And there was a reason why German Bundesliga was shown in the US, because they were the first ones back on the pitch, which is kind of amazing, soccer not being that much of a, or that big of a sport in the US, at least when it comes to TV. Anyways, with that in mind, we understood that the consumption of sports has followed a path to digital. And while linear TV still broadcasts many of the events, and we love to be part of it, much of the infrastructure around the sport is happening and consumed online. And so in essence, we apply a good mix of this approach to our audiences.
I think that basing the message around the consumer need is just something that's has only become highlighted and underscored as increasingly important in all of this. And you start certainly seeing brands make a conscious effort to kind of recognize that and adjust their approach accordingly. And on the kind of buying side of things, if you, as you look to kind of next year's activation, whatever you can share, obviously, do you see there being any impact on linear TV? Do you think, like, for example, the upfronts might look different this year given all that uncertainty? And how are you guys approaching that?
I have to be honest, I haven't been to any upfronts in the US. Here in Europe, they certainly have changed in terms of format. Obviously, they're digital in nature. And as Mark has stated in the opening, there's a lot of conversations on connected TV, and we embrace it so much. However, in the running up to this, and especially during the last couple of months, there's so much conversations and messages from linear TV broadcasters and how their consumption of their product has increased dramatically, which is great for them, as they've seen some decline over the last years, even though they've never really died the death that some of the industry specialists have foreseen. But in between COVID and the presidential election today, numerous occasions have been arising where consumers were glued to their TV to quench the thirst for the latest news. And I expect, in the upfronts to see a lot of these rising graphs showing that trend. However, at the same time, I do see that linear TV's share in the entertainment area has suffered severely. And that's where consumers showed us very clearly of where the path leads all around in terms of what type of content to produce, how to serve it, and honestly, where brands potentially fit into that journey. And I have a funny kind of example when regarding my family and my kids. I have 4 kids ranging from 1 to 11. So that's how I can future-proof any and every kind of media understanding that I think I have, and I have less than I thought. But this summer, we watched some movie together on a German TV broadcast station, and the movie was great. And when the first ad break came up, they were entertained and watched it, but after the 3rd, 4th, or 5th, they were going berserk. And they wouldn't understand why it wouldn't stop. And when the second ad break came on, it became really clear that we're not going to finish that movie. And then that really shows that the change is inevitable. It's on a larger scale. And even if we live in this industry bubble and we have maybe a somewhat diversified media consumption versus the general population, I think linear TV has a few challenges, and they need to kind of pick up on that. And you can also see the adoption of this target audience in new media in out of home, where some of the posters become TikTok videos where models and brands represent themselves. So I think it's a great shift, and it's hitting us, and change is the only constant in the game.
Absolutely. Couldn't be more true. And it's being exacerbated, certainly has been over the course of this year. And you mentioned connected TV as an emerging channel, and we heard Marcus kind of mention it as well in his introduction. I'm wondering, does the disruption that's been caused maybe pave the way for a brand like Bose to explore, invest deeper in other maybe lesser known strategies or lesser invested in strategies? Like I'm thinking influencer or virtual eventing, things like that. Has that been, have you seen that as an opportunity? And if so, are there any channels in particular that have piqued your interest?
Oh, it's definitely an interesting field, and it's always good for us to explore. Shortly going back to connected TV, there's a big thirst on our side, and we're really welcoming the up and coming also cross-border offerings that the linear stations have collaborated together in order to achieve this offering, and it's very much appreciated. When it comes to influencers, virtual eventing, basically we've jumped on that ship a while ago already, because we're never really satisfied with the status quo at Bose, and are given a mandate to question the now and research and experiment. And then in essence, we're an R&D company. So if anything, this investigation needs to be ongoing, and factually always has been. Right? The closer you look at your audiences, the more diversified you find it is. And in order to address our consumers, we always needed to leverage multiple touch points, multiple storytellers, and messages. And in that context, influencers, athletes, talents, everything came into play. And we're building it out, and we're definitely amplifying that. So if anything, the disruption has maybe enforced us more usage rather than creating it from scratch.
And it's so funny to hear you refer to Bose as an R&D company essentially, because so many of us as consumers view it as this luxury brand. But I know, and because I grew up not too far from Bose HQ in the U.S. and outside of Boston, that it's all about the technology inside of those walls, right? I mean, company was founded by an MIT graduate, I believe that's right, and it's funny. Right. How much pride the business takes in their technology. That's really the pride point. So it's cool to see that kind of. I think it's a really interesting perspective, and it's cool to see that start to imbue itself in different ways in terms of how you're testing out different channels and trying out different approaches in the media sphere specifically. Let's turn the page to. We've been talking short term. Let's turn the page to the long term. And one topic that I'd be keen to get your thoughts on is. There's been lots of conversation looming around and lots of uncertainty looming certainly around the market on the deprecation of the cookie, on iOS 14 and IDFA blocking, and all of these sort of moves being seen as moves towards increasing user privacy. I'm just curious where you stand on the subject. Is this a topic you guys are talking about internally? Do you see this as a threat or an opportunity? And are there potentially some existing solutions or conversations that you're having right now that you're exploring to potentially future-proof against this?
Looking into the future. I first and foremost see any increase in the protection of consumer privacy as a positive and even as a must-have. And okay, maybe I'll have a few more challenges in targeting the right audience at the right time with the right message on the right device, etc. But honestly, I wouldn't want it any other way if that meant intruding in whatever shape or form in something where someone does not want me to interfere in. And every advertiser that is familiar with the term brand safety must be equally aware of their customers' need to be treated in a safe way. And I think we as an industry need to kind of put that as a priority out there. That's my pitch. The term at play here is, I think, knowledge asymmetry. And in my mind, it always leaves one side with an advantage and the other one with a potential disadvantage. And in this digital world, there's a strong delta between what consumer knows and what we know about tracking. And a good example of that might be your reaction, Matt, or my reaction versus my partner's when we watched The Social Dilemma versus the response, right, to people not working in the industry. Most of us probably knew a great deal about what was shown, and with a few caveats here and there. But outside of that, people were probably shocked, or maybe not. Do they care about being tracked or not? You can ask. Maybe they do, maybe they don't. But it's, I think, a clear sign that they don't understand the value of this tracking. And in order to ensure a fair trade between the knowledge that we have and the products that we advertise, this knowledge gap needs to be bridged. In my mind, that shows that we need guiding principles to ensure fair trade and a good relationship. And so I think the measures that you mentioned above at least help putting this topic back on consumers' minds and also on, maybe legislations. Bottom line, I think we must treat consumer privacy with the highest level of priority. And this bears opportunities because in order to win in this, we really need to get closer to understanding customer needs. We need to do this in a fair way, but we also need to show the customer that we respect that. And we need to, gain that understanding and build from that on up. And something that I think, especially looking at Bose for the last couple of years, we've excelled in that when building our products.
And I couldn't agree more. And I think it's, it's great to hear a brand thinking this way about sort of the value transaction, the value exchange between user privacy and what liberties we may take as, in terms of messaging, and always a tweetable machine with the knowledge is a symmetry quote. I think I'm sure that's probably already been posted. And I'm wondering, do you think that there's potential, this represents potential challenges, or do you have concerns that your business is growing increasingly in the e-com space, you're shuttering brick and mortar stores in favor of selling online, but these changes potentially impact your ability to measure, to do sort of sophisticated attribution within the digital sector? Is that something that you guys are just saying, listen, we're okay with it? Or is there sort of another approach that you're taking to address that head on?
Good question. And we're testing and probing, right? There are a lot of good opportunities to get in touch with our consumers with their consent and ask for that value exchange, which does exactly that. But those, in comparison to the overall playing field, are just fewer. And so we're getting more selective in that respect. We have to be. And we have worked and learned a lot in advertising and understand the different scenarios that good contextual advertising practices come with, right? Even before the digital capability of measuring it. So on the one side, we advertise where we know our audience is, and we know that the content they consume is the content they love, and we can jump on that, be it sport, music, passion points that are part of people's lives. And at the same time, we can leverage our knowledge given the context of our audience in the given situation, varying from a more leaned back TV approach to a more leaned in mobile approach. So the ad experience itself needs to be different, and we can leverage our knowledge with the selected partners to gain an advantage in that game. But we also value our partners and those that have substantial first-party data that we can leverage, and we have embraced the journey to learn more from our consumers by means of apps that are aimed to enhance the listening experience. So we've been working on that, and that's been something new for us. And via the apps, we can get in touch with the consumer and allow the consumer to get in touch with us and keep the conversation going. Maybe the one weakness in all of that is the complete attribution, and what Marcus said in the beginning, the capability of measuring each incremental impact of every media message, whatever part of the communication has hit the consumer. And I'm really happy to, people like Trade Desk and Teads and others out there are helping brands and each other to find a way to enhance the capability of a transparent measurement system.
And I'm glad you brought that up, especially because, where my head goes to next is with these changes, the insular networks, let's call them, what historically known as walled gardens, seem to have an advantage, right? They can bring their own attribution tools, their own measurement and tracking tools, and introduce those and can sort of evaluate their own ecosystem accordingly. And Bose has taken, a stance, pretty strong stance as recently as this summer on, really being promoting equity within the ecosystem, and giving kind of a fair shot to media players, both big and small. So I guess the question is, what's your view? What do you think if we extrapolate some of these user privacy changes that we expect to be implemented, does that change your view one way or the other, positive or negative, on the walled gardens? And do you plan to expand beyond them? Where do you all see opportunity to do so?
I believe that walled gardens have developed a great product to generate revenue, first and foremost, for them, but also connect people, serve content that's highly relevant and appreciated, and enabled us brands to leverage that, even though they have a proper advantage maybe towards other platforms. They also showed us that their platform works. So it's a great product with a lot of winners on the side, right? But naturally, we have to keep an eye on what's at play on a larger scale. And in light of your intro to this question, we have to assess our position continuously. And I think brands have a responsibility in that respect. And we witnessed that the effort paid off. Now, I think beyond walled gardens is a natural must for any and everyone in the game. And the strong network of close partnerships is one area where I foresee more opportunities. Mentioned before, the value exchange I really aim for with these partners will be based on a thoroughly researched framework and the potentially mutual exchange of first-party data on a longer-term approach.
Great. Okay, we've reached the lightning round here, Jorma. So I've got a few that I'm just going to fire off at you and give me your thoughts on it. So the first is, in your position, I think you are fortunate to get to sample all of the sort of latest and greatest technology, both obviously within the consumer electronics space as an R&D company, of course, but also with a media focus as well. And so I'm curious if there's one innovation or technology that you've seen or heard about recently that really gets you excited, one that excites you the most.
Okay, it might not be the most recent one, and I'm sorry to drag this lightning around on maybe a lengthier answer, but so there's still room for improvement when it comes to real-time voice translation. this is what I'm really excited about. If you've seen my LinkedIn profile, I speak about 5 languages, of which 3 near native. And I always tell my kids how great it feels to be able to walk into a country and connect to the people and the culture and experience that. And language is a key item that enables people to connect to each other. So I've seen stuff in app development and come across a Chinese company called iFlight Tech, where people speak into a device. It's being translated into the language of your choice. And I would love to see maybe a pair of Bose frames or a headset that does exactly that, right? Maybe a bit Star Trek-y, but real-time voice translation. You speak in English und ich rede mit dir auf Deutsch, wo du jetzt gar nichts verstehst, but you would understand that. And that, I think, is a dream of mine.
I love it. I mean, wasn't expecting to get full German on this call.
Sorry about that.
I love it. I love it. Okay, another one for you. So, you know, we've got, I think, folks from all different sectors on this call today. It's great, which is great. And I think you've given some really candid answers about how much those values and treats it appreciates the value exchange between consumer privacy and you know, marketplace messaging. And that's certainly a big takeaway for me. But let's put on your mentor hat for a second. And if you've got a up and coming consumer technology brand that's sitting on the call right now, that's building their business from scratch, from the ground up, you give them one piece of advice, what would it be?
I'd say fail fast and cheap. Keep your eye on the ball, meaning the consumer. Focus on delivering the value to them while not being afraid to climb the tree on the wrong branch and realize that on the journey up. And it's a quote I stole from our founder, Dr. Bose. He said that research is much like climbing a tree, and every once in a while, even though you're climbing up, you will find yourself on the wrong branch and not the trunk, and you'll reach that position. Have the guts to go back and find another way up until you reach the top, and that's it. Don't give up.
Fail fast. I think something that we could all take into our
Don't be afraid of it. Celebrate it.
I love it. I promise we've saved time for questions, and I see that we have a couple here. And please, if anyone has any, put them here in the chat. So first one here, what innovations and technologies are you utilizing to execute your strategies, and how has that changed since the pandemic began?
Wow, a lot of them. So some of that I mentioned, right? The customer experience on site, leveraging first-party data and putting that into a technological targeting machine, maybe leveraging artificial intelligence onto that. So it's customer experience innovations as well as media innovations that we aim to close the loop between communication and e-commerce with.
And I see a few questions coming in about Bose's approach to emerging media channels and how they factor into the overall strategy. It seems particularly there's some interest in how heritage brands can learn from digital never brands or digital first brands when it comes to authentic communication and messaging to, you know, the Gen Z audience that generally a bit more cynical.
So we're a research company, right? We research an audience. I research media, and my approach to media investments are basically structured into a 70-20-10 approach. 70% of my investment needs to generate the ROI that I need in order to go back to the business and say, my campaign, my communication has been a success. The 10%, I'll skip the 20 for a minute, is answering that question, is going after the up and coming, the stuff that's new on the market that hasn't been tried or vetted by anyone or anybody. And I jump on these with a given hope that they might work in terms of my researching the media channel or the media technology or whatever it is. And then seeing how this is a continuous flow of where I'm trying to find these 10% items and pushing them over into the 20 or the 70 bracket.
And are there particular success metrics that you look at or benchmarks that you see along the way where it's a signal to you to say, okay, this justifies moving to the 10 to the 20 to the 70?
It's difficult with benchmarks at the 10% bracket, but we have a grid and we have an understanding whether it's customer engagement that we're looking for or within a given creative, because there's a lot of innovations out there that point to that, or if it's the consumer behavior on our site, or if it's, you know, how long does it take to get the consumer down to the funnel and to purchase? What is he going to say about the product afterwards. Those are all metrics that we employ. There's a ton of more, but these are the key ones.
That's great. Another question coming in is, what trends in consumer behavior are of particular importance to you and marketers now? How are they consuming media differently? So I guess really looking for, are there specific trends, consumer trends that are of higher importance, more significant value to you that Bose looks at as a accurate representation of the marketplace?
I think the line I said earlier is it's the COVID and the pandemic causing a lot of us staying at home has amplified something that was already there in terms of consumption. We've done our Netflix binge watching for 5 years now, but it's been increasing. It's been the scale that it has reached and hit larger audiences has increased. And so I think the consumption has just been amplified in that sense. I'm not sure if it's gone completely different. I don't think consumer behavior as such changes that rapidly. I think it's impacted. It might go back to somewhat level of normal. It's difficult to foresee, but in keeping the communication open with the consumers, we're trying to gain as much understanding, as many insights, and actioning these insights in media plans and on our site.
And within this sort of digital sector, just going back to the fact that, benchmarking and finding success metrics themes can be challenging, particularly when you're exploring emerging formats and emerging technologies. But are there kind of, tried and true digital benchmarks that you're looking at and are you evolving that at all? You're hearing a lot in the space these days around hot button topics around attention economy and, moving from things like, not to get too tactical, but moving from viewability to time spent. How's Bose approaching that with regards to digital media and kind of benchmarking success accordingly?
We have our pillars, right? So there's a place for time spent on an ad, time spent on a site, and we're employing these. There's also a clickable, a viewable, and there's brand safety measures that we cannot forget about. We're basically putting all that in the box, and depending on the activity that we're looking at, applying these in a very rigid way. That's not to say that those can't change. For example, we've had measures that address the quality of traffic by means of time spent on site or pages viewed, and we're gradually having evolved this to a somewhat more solidified metric. So there's constant changes in that game.
And is there any one that stands out to you that you guys value more than the next, or is it pretty equitable in that sense?
It is pretty equitable. Yeah. It really, I have to say.
That's great. Well, listen, the clock has just struck 1, which means I think that we're out of time. But this was an absolute pleasure, Jorma. I always love chatting with you. It's been great, and I think to get this level of candor from someone in your position about your approach to the marketplace, how you're looking at some of the looming trends that are certainly going to impact our lives as we go into next year and beyond, has been just for me really insightful and has been great to hear. So thanks for your time.
Thank you, Matt. Really, likewise. I love chatting to you.
Guys, thank you so much. That was so interesting. I think we all enjoyed. There's a few points I took from you guys. Learning from existing customers to find new ones. That's a sort of really interesting theme. Pushing the industry to work together, I think, was some good points that you both made. And then we definitely learned from the Jorma Kremser family experience that you all need to work together to build a sort of better value exchange for the consumers, because perhaps young people aren't so keen on 15 ads, per ad break and every ad break every 5 minutes. So that's what we all need to focus on. Guys, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you
very much.
Bye-bye.
Bye. So Jorma and Matthew have